The knife bit into the cottonwood with a whisper that sounded like prayer, and Clara Hartwell knew if she did not finish 3 more carvings by sundown, she would not eat tomorrow. Her fingers ached from the cold Montana morning in October of 1883, but she kept working the blade against the pale wood, coaxing out the shape of a horse's head that she could see hidden inside the grain. The town of Elkhorn Valley sprawled behind her in a collection of weathered buildings and broken promises. But Clara had claimed this spot near the general store because travelers passed through here, and travelers sometimes had coins to spare for something beautiful. She had been carving since her father taught her when she was 12 years old, back when they had a farm and a future. Now at 23, she had nothing but the clothes on her back, a bedroll in the boarding house she could barely afford, and hands that remembered how to make something out of nothing. The sun climbed higher, turning the dirt street gold, and Clara finished the horse head, setting it carefully on the wooden crate beside her other pieces. A small bear, a dove with spread wings, an old man's face, weathered and wise. Each one represented hours of work, and each one might bring 50 cents if she was lucky, $1 if the buyer was generous or drunk. She picked up another piece of wood and began again, her mind going quiet the way it always did when she carved, the world narrowing to just the blade and the grain, and the shape emerging like truth from lies. She did not notice the man watching her until his shadow fell across her work. Clara looked up sharply, her hand tightening on the knife, but the man stepped back immediately, raising both hands in a gesture of peace. He was tall, lean in the way cowboys got from long days in the saddle, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he wore his gun low on his hip like a man who knew how to use it but did not particularly want to. "I did not mean to startle you," he said, his voice rough with either thirst or disuse. "I was just watching you work. That is some fine craftsmanship." Clara relaxed slightly but kept the knife where she could use it. "Thank you. Are you looking to buy something?" The man crouched down, studying the pieces on her crate with genuine interest. He picked up the horse head, turning it in his hands, and Clara saw calluses on his fingers, the kind that came from rope and leather and hard work. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "How long did this take you?" 3 hours, give or take." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt something shift in the air between them. "You have a gift," he said. "I've never seen anything like this. The detail in the mane, the way you captured the expression. This horse looks like it is about to run." Clara felt warmth rise in her chest, dangerous and unwelcome. Compliments did not pay for food. "It is for sale if you're interested, $1. The man set the horse head down carefully and stood, digging into his pocket. He pulled out a silver dollar and placed it in her palm, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. "I will take it, but I want to ask you something else, if you will hear me out." Clara pocketed the coin quickly, then met his eyes. "I am listening." "Would you teach me how to do that?" He gestured to her carvings, his expression earnest. "I have been working cattle for 10 years, and I'm good at it, but I want to learn something that creates instead of just moving things from one place to another. I can pay you for lessons. Not much, but something." Clara stared at him, trying to understand if this was some kind of trick. Men did not usually ask her for anything except the price of her carvings or occasionally things she would never sell. "Why would a cowboy want to learn wood carving?" The man smiled, and it changed his whole face, making him younger and more open. "Because a cowboy gets tired of dust and cattle and sleeping on the ground. Because I saw what you can do, and it made me feel something I have not felt in a long time. Because maybe there is more to life than just surviving." He paused. "My name is James Thornton. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles east of here. I come into town every Saturday for supplies. I could meet you here or wherever you would prefer, and you could teach me. I will pay you 50 cents a lesson." Clara's mind raced through the arithmetic. 50 cents a week, every week. just for teaching someone what her father had taught her. It would mean the difference between hunger and stability, between worry and a little bit of peace. But it also meant spending time with this stranger, this man whose eyes seemed to see right through her careful defenses. "I do not know you," she said slowly. "I do not know if I can trust you." James nodded as if he had expected this. "That is fair. Ask anyone in town about me. I have been working at the Double R for 3 years. Sheriff Anderson knows me. So does Pastor Williams at the church. I am not asking for anything except lessons in carving. You can choose where we meet, and you can tell people where you will be. I just want to learn." Clara studied him for a long moment, weighing risk against reward, fear against the possibility of something better. Finally, she said, "Saturdays. Here, by the general store. 2 hours each time. You bring your own wood and your own knife. I will teach you what I know, but I cannot promise you will be any good at it." James's smile widened into a grin. "That is all I am asking. Thank you, Miss Hartwell. Clara Hartwell. Miss Hartwell, I will see you this Saturday then. Around 10 in the morning? 10 is fine." He tipped his hat to her, then picked up his new carving and walked toward the general store, his stride easy and confident. Clara watched him go, feeling something flutter in her chest that she had thought died with her father and their farm. Hope, maybe? Or just the dangerous beginning of it. Saturday came with clouds that threatened rain but never delivered. Clara arrived at her usual spot early, bringing extra wood and a spare knife her father had left her, just in case James had not taken her instructions seriously. But at precisely 10 in the morning he appeared, carrying a good-sized piece of pine and a knife that looked well-maintained if unpracticed. "I asked the ranch foreman if I could have some scrap lumber," James said as he settled down across from her. "He looked at me like I had gone crazy, but he let me take what I needed." Clara picked up the pine and examined it. "This will work. Pine is soft, good for learning. You will make mistakes on it, but that is the point." She handed it back to him. "First thing you need to understand is the grain. See these lines? You always want to cut with the grain when you can, not against it. Cutting against the grain will give you splinters and rough edges." James held the wood up to the light, studying the grain pattern, like combing a horse's mane. "You go with the direction, not against it." "Exactly." Clara felt herself relax slightly. Maybe he would be a good student after all. "Now hold your knife like this." She demonstrated, her grip firm but not tight. "You want control, but you also want to be able to feel the wood. If you hold too tight, your hand will cramp and you will lose precision." James imitated her grip, adjusting his fingers until Clara nodded approval. "Good. Now we are going to start with something simple. A smooth stone shape. Nothing fancy, just learning how to shave the wood evenly." For the next 2 hours, Clara guided James through the basics of carving, correcting his grip when it slipped, showing him how to angle the blade, explaining the difference between a carving cut and a whittling cut. He was attentive and patient, listening to her instructions and following them carefully. He did not complain when he got a splinter or when his first attempts came out rough and uneven. He just kept working, his brow furrowed in concentration. By the end of the lesson, he had produced something that vaguely resembled a smooth stone, though it had a flat spot on one side where he had cut too deep. "That is not bad for a first try," Clara said, and she meant it. "You have steady hands. That will help." James looked up at her, his face flushed with effort and pleasure. "I have never focused on something like this before. It is different from ranch work, quieter in my head." Clara understood exactly what he meant. "That is why I love it. When I'm carving, nothing else matters. The world gets simple." James handed her 50 cents, the coins warm from his pocket. "Same time next week?" "Same time." He stood, tucking his misshapen stone carving into his pocket like it was treasure. "Thank you, Miss Hartwell. I will practice during the week." After he left, Clara sat for a moment, feeling the weight of the coins in her hand and something else, something lighter in her chest. She had not expected to enjoy teaching. She had not expected to like James Thornton, but she did. And that complicated things in ways she was not ready to think about. The weeks passed in a rhythm that became familiar and then necessary. Every Saturday, James appeared at 10 in the morning, and every Saturday, Clara taught him something new. They progressed from smooth shapes to simple animals, from basic cuts to more intricate techniques. James proved to be a dedicated student, showing up each week with pieces he had practiced during his spare time at the ranch. Some were rough, but they showed steady improvement. As the lessons continued, they began to talk. At first, it was just small comments about the weather or the town, but gradually, the conversations deepened. James told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, about drifting west looking for work and purpose. Clara found herself sharing things she had not spoken about in years. Her father's death 2 years ago from a fall that should not have killed him but did. The farm they lost to debt. The way she had ended up here in Elkhorn Valley with nothing but her knife and her skill. "You could have remarried," James said one Saturday in late November, when the cold had settled in for real, and they worked with gloves that they pulled off only when they needed to make a cut. "A woman with your skills, your intelligence, surely there were offers." Clara kept her eyes on her work, carving a deer that had begun to look alive under her hands. "There were offers. None of them were about me. They were about men wanting a housekeeper they did not have to pay, or a mother for children that were not mine, or just someone to warm their bed. I will not trade myself for survival. I would rather starve." James was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I understand that. Wanting to be seen for who you are, not what you can provide." Clara looked up at him and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Understanding. Real understanding. Not the kind that people pretended to have to end an uncomfortable conversation. "You're getting better at this, Shiwai," she said, nodding at his work. He was carving a wolf's head, and while it was not perfect, it had life in it, personality. "Another few months and you could sell these?" "I do not want to sell them," James said. "I just want to make them. To know that I can create something that might last after I'm gone." The wind picked up, scattering wood shavings across the dirt, and Clara shivered despite her coat. James noticed immediately. "You are cold. We should stop for today. We still have 20 minutes. Then let us spend them getting warm. There is a cafe 2 streets over. I will buy you coffee." Clara hesitated. Accepting the lesson payment was one thing. It was a business transaction. But coffee felt different, more personal. Still, she was cold, and the idea of sitting in a warm room with James Thornton did not feel as dangerous as it should. "All right," she said. "Coffee." The cafe was small and warm, heated by a potbelly stove that glowed red in the corner. They sat at a table by the window, and James ordered 2 coffees and a slice of apple pie that he insisted they share. The coffee was hot and bitter and perfect, and the pie was sweet enough to make Clara close her eyes in pleasure. "When did you last have pie?" James asked, watching her. "Months. I usually cannot afford it." He pushed the plate closer to her. "Then you eat most of it. I have pie at the ranch sometimes." They talked while the cafe filled with other customers seeking warmth. James told her about his horse, a mare named Dancer who was getting old but still had spirit. Clara told him about the boarding house where she lived, about the other residents who were mostly miners and drifters, people passing through with no intention of staying. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams that seemed impossible but felt less so when spoken aloud in the warmth of the cafe. When they finally left, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. James walked Clara back to the boarding house, even though she told him it was not necessary. "I know it is not necessary," he said, "but I want to, if that is all right with you." Clara found that it was more than all right. It was nice, having someone care whether she got home safely, having someone to talk to as the day ended. At the boarding house steps, James tipped his hat to her. "I will see you next Saturday, Miss Hartwell." "Clara," she said impulsively. "You can call me Clara." His smile was like sunrise. "Clara, and you should call me James, not Mr. Thornton." "James." He said her name once more, quietly, like he was tasting it. Then he turned and walked into the growing dark, and Clara stood on the steps watching him go, feeling the dangerous flutter in her chest grow into something bigger, something she could not ignore anymore. Winter deepened, and the lessons continued. Sometimes they met in the cafe when the weather was too cold to work outside, sitting by the window with their wood and knives, drawing curious looks from other patrons. Clara found that she looked forward to Saturdays with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. James had become more than a student. He had become a friend, and friends were something Clara had learned to live without because losing them hurt too much. But James was persistent in his gentleness. He brought her gloves when he noticed hers were worn through. He always insisted on buying coffee after their lessons, and sometimes he brought extra food from the ranch, bread or cheese, or once a jar of preserves that the foreman's wife had made. Clara accepted these gifts because refusing them seemed churlish, but also because she was tired of refusing kindness, tired of being so alone. One Saturday in December, James arrived looking troubled. Clara noticed immediately as he sat down across from her, his usual smile absent. "What is wrong?" she asked. James pulled out his current project, a carving of a mountain lion, but he did not start working on it. Instead, he looked at Clara with an expression she could not quite read. "The foreman told me this week that the ranch is cutting workers after the new year. Business has been slow, and they cannot afford to keep everyone on. I have seniority, so I will probably stay, but there is a chance I will not." Clara felt her stomach drop. "Where would you go?" "I do not know. Wherever there is work, maybe south to Wyoming or west to Idaho." He paused, his fingers tightening on the wood. "I do not want to go. I have reasons to stay here now." The way he looked at her when he said it made Clara's heart beat faster. She knew what he meant, had known for weeks that something was building between them, something more than friendship. But knowing it and acknowledging it were different things. "James," she started, but he held up a hand. "I am not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know, in case things change, in case I have to leave. I wanted you to know that these lessons, these Saturdays with you, they have been the best part of my life for months now. Not just because of the carving, though I love that, because of you. Because you are brilliant and strong, and you see the world in a way that makes me want to see it that way too." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I am not strong. I am barely surviving." "You are surviving with grace and skill and without compromising who you are. That is the definition of strong." James reached across the space between them and took her hand, his fingers warm despite the cold. "I know you are cautious. I know you have been hurt and that you have learned not to trust easily, but I am asking you to trust me, not today, not right now, but maybe someday." Clara looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they both carried, the nicks and scars from blades and work. She thought about what her life had been before James, about the loneliness she had worn like armor. She thought about what it might be like to let that armor fall. "I do trust you," she said softly. "That is what scares me." James squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Then let us just keep going the way we are, one Saturday at a time, and whatever happens with the ranch, we will figure it out." They worked in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence, full of understanding. Clara watched James carve his mountain lion, noticing the confidence in his cuts now, the way he had internalized her lessons and made them his own. He had become a real wood carver, someone who could look at a piece of wood and see what it wanted to become. "You should enter something in the county fair next summer," Clara said suddenly. "They have a crafts competition. You could win." James looked up, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so. You have improved more in 3 months than most people do in years." He smiled at her, that sunrise smile that made everything feel possible. "Only because I have a good teacher." Christmas came, and with it a surprise. James appeared on Christmas Eve afternoon at the boarding house, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. Clara had been in her room trying to ignore the sounds of celebration from downstairs, where some of the other residents were drinking and playing cards. She had nothing to celebrate this year, no money for gifts or special food, and she had resigned herself to spending the day carving and trying not to think about past Christmases when her father was alive. But then the landlady knocked on her door and told her she had a visitor, and Clara came downstairs to find James waiting, snow dusting his shoulders and his hat. "I know we do not have a lesson today," he said, "but I wanted to give you this." Clara took the package, her hands trembling slightly. She unwrapped it carefully, not wanting to tear the paper, and inside found a pair of leather gloves, lined with soft wool. They were beautiful, clearly expensive, and Clara felt her throat tighten. "James, I cannot accept these. They are too much." "They are not too much. They are exactly right." He took a step closer, his voice low and earnest. "Clara, you have given me so much these past months. You have taught me a skill that brings me joy. But more than that, you have given me your time and your attention and your trust. Let me give you something in return, something that will keep you warm when you work." Clara looked at the gloves, then at James, and felt something break open inside her, some last defense crumbling. "I have something for you too," she said quietly. "Wait here." She ran upstairs and retrieved the carving she had been working on in secret for weeks, hiding it whenever he came for lessons. It was a small sculpture of a cowboy on a horse, both rendered in intricate detail. She had carved James's face onto the cowboy, capturing his expression when he was focused on his work, that look of peaceful concentration. When she gave it to him, his eyes widened. "Clara, this is incredible. This is me. I wanted you to have something to remember these lessons by, in case you do have to leave for work." James held the carving like it was made of glass, studying every detail. When he looked up at her, his eyes were bright. "I am not going to forget these lessons or you, no matter what happens, but thank you. This is the best gift I have ever received." They stood there, in the boarding house hallway, the sounds of Christmas celebration drifting around them, and James reached out slowly, giving Clara time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face in his hand, his palm warm against her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the ways this could end badly. But she was tired of being afraid, tired of protecting herself from possible pain by guaranteeing present loneliness. "Yes," she said. James kissed her softly, a gentle pressure of lips that felt like a question and an answer all at once. Clara closed her eyes and let herself feel it, the warmth and the wanting, the simple human connection she had denied herself for so long. When they pulled apart, James rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you," he said. "I have been for weeks. I know it is fast, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know." Clara's breath caught. She wanted to say it back, wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, but the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with fear and hope. Instead, she kissed him again, trying to say with actions what she could not yet say with words. When they finally separated, James smiled at her, understanding in his eyes. "One Saturday at a time," he said. "That is still enough for me." The new year arrived, and with it came news. The ranch had decided to keep James on after all, but at reduced wages. He told Clara this during their first lesson of 1884, his relief evident. "It is not ideal," he said, "but it means I can stay in Elkhorn Valley. That is what matters to me." They had been meeting 3 times a week now instead of just Saturdays, whenever James could get time away from the ranch. Their relationship had shifted after Christmas, becoming something openly romantic. They held hands as they walked through town. James kissed her goodbye after each meeting. They talked about the future in careful, hopeful terms. But Clara still had not said she loved him, and she could see the question in his eyes sometimes, the gentle wondering if she ever would. The truth was that Clara was terrified. Loving someone meant giving them the power to hurt you, and she had been hurt so much already. Her mother had died when she was 10. Her father had died and left her alone. Every time she had tried to build something stable, life had torn it away. She wanted to believe that James would be different, but wanting and believing were not the same thing. One afternoon in February, they were working in the cafe, carving by the window while snow fell outside. James was working on a set of animals, planning to give them to the foreman's children. Clara was carving a woman's face, someone imaginary, someone beautiful and at peace. "Tell me something you have never told anyone, Denor," James said suddenly. Clara looked up from her work. "Why?" "Because I want to know everything about you, even the secret things, especially those." Clara considered, then set down her knife. "When my father died, I was angry at him. Not just sad, but furious. He fell from the barn loft because he had been drinking. He had been drinking more and more those last months, ever since we got the notice about losing the farm. I understood why he drank, but I was still angry that he chose that instead of choosing to stay with me. I have never said that out loud before. It feels like a betrayal." James reached across the table and took her hand. "It is not a betrayal. It is honest. You can love someone and still be angry at them for leaving." "Are you angry at your parents?" Clara asked, "or for dying of cholera?" "I was for a long time. I felt like they abandoned me, even though I knew it was not their choice. It took me years to forgive them for something they could not control." He paused. "But I learned that you can hold multiple feelings at once. Love and anger, grief and relief, fear and hope." Clara squeezed his hand. "What are you afraid of?" "That I will lose you before I really have you. That you will decide I am not worth the risk." The honesty in his voice made Clara's chest ache. She had been so focused on her own fear that she had not fully considered his. He was risking just as much as she was, maybe more, because he had already laid his heart bare while she kept hers guarded. "I'm afraid of the same thing," she admitted. "That I will lose you, that I will let myself love you completely, and then something will happen, and I will be alone again." "So we are both afraid," James said. "But we are here anyway. That has to count for something." Clara looked at him across the table, at his honest eyes and his strong hands, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. She thought about the past months, about how he had shown up every single time, how he had been patient with her fears, how he had given her space to trust him at her own pace. "It counts for everything," she said. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed in the boarding house and let herself imagine a different future, a future where she was not alone, where she woke up next to James, where they carved together not in cafes and street corners but in their own home. It was a dangerous thing to imagine, but it was also beautiful, and for the first time in years, Clara let herself believe it might be possible. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting into mud, the trees beginning to bud. Clara's carving business picked up as travelers returned to the roads. She sold more pieces in March than she had in the previous 2 months combined, and for the first time since her father died, she had money saved. A small amount tucked away in a tin under her bed. James had become an accomplished carver in his own right. People who saw his work marveled at it, and the general store owner had asked if he could display some pieces for sale. James had agreed, and to his surprise, they sold quickly. He gave half the money to Clara, insisting she take it as payment for all the lessons, but she refused. "You earned that with your own skill," she said. "I will not take it." "Then let me spend it on you," James countered. "Let me take you to dinner. A real dinner, not just coffee and shared pie." Clara agreed, and the following Saturday they went to the nicest restaurant in Elkhorn Valley, a place with tablecloths and candles and food that tasted like celebration. James wore his best shirt, and Clara wore a dress she had borrowed from another woman at the boarding house, blue calico that made her eyes look bright. Over roast chicken and potatoes, James told her about his dreams for the future. "I've been thinking about buying land," he said. "Nothing big, just a small place where I could keep a few horses, maybe some cattle. I could still work at the ranch part-time, but I would have something of my own, something I'm building toward." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said, and she meant it. She could picture James on his own land, working for himself, creating the life he wanted. I want you to be part of it, James said, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. I am not proposing, not yet. I know you need more time, but I am telling you what I want, so you know where my heart is. I want land and a house and a life with you in it. I want to wake up next to you and carve with you and grow old with you. I want everything, Clara. Clara felt tears well up, but they were not sad tears. They were the kind that came from being seen, really seen, by someone who loved you. I want that too, she whispered. I am still afraid, but I want it. James reached across the table and wiped away a tear with his thumb. Being afraid is all right. We can be afraid together. As they left the restaurant walking under a sky full of stars, James pulled Clara into an alley out of view of the street and kissed her deeply, his hands in her hair, his body warm against hers. Clara kissed him back with all the love she had been too scared to say, trying to show him what words could not yet express. I am falling in love with you, she said against his lips. I am already halfway there. Then I will wait for the other half, James said, smiling, however long it takes. In April, disaster struck. A fire broke out at the Double R Ranch, starting in the barn and spreading quickly. James was there when it happened, helping to free the horses before the structure collapsed. He managed to get all the animals out, but in the process he was struck by a falling beam. It caught him across the shoulder and back, and though it did not break bones, it left him bruised and burned. Clara did not learn about the fire until the next morning, when the sheriff came to find her. James Thornton asked me to tell you he is all right, Sheriff Anderson said, but he is at Doc Miller's place getting patched up. Thought you would want to know. Clara ran the entire way to the doctor's house, her heart in her throat, her mind spinning with fear. When she burst into the room where James was resting, he looked up at her with tired eyes, but managed a smile. I am all right, he said. It looks worse than it is. Clara did not care that the doctor was there or that she was supposed to be composed. She went to James and took his face in her hands, searching for injuries, reassuring herself that he was alive and whole. You stupid, brave man, she said, her voice shaking. You could have died, but I did not. The horses are safe. Everyone is safe. I do not care about the horses, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. I care about you. I love you, James. I love you, and I should have said it weeks ago, and if you had died without knowing it, I would never have forgiven myself. James's eyes widened, then softened. He reached up, wincing slightly at the movement, and pulled Clara down into a gentle kiss. I love you too, he said. I have loved you since the day you agreed to teach me. Since before that, maybe. Since the moment I saw you carving and knew I was looking at someone extraordinary. Clara sat beside him on the bed, holding his hand carefully, and for a long time, they just looked at each other, saying with silence what they had finally said with words. The barn is gone, James said eventually. Most of the equipment, too. The ranch owner is talking about selling out, moving back east. That means I will be out of work within a month. Clara felt her stomach clench. What will you do? I have some money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land if I'm careful. There is a plot for sale about 3 miles outside town, 20 acres with a creek running through it. I was planning to wait another year before buying, but I think now is the time. I will build a small house, start my own operation. He paused, his eyes searching hers. I want you to come with me. As my wife, if you will have me. I know this is not the romantic proposal you deserve, and I do not even have a ring, but I cannot wait anymore. Life is too short and too uncertain. Marry me, Clara. Build a life with me. Clara looked at James, bandaged and bruised and offering her everything. She thought about all her fears, all her careful defenses, and realized that none of them mattered anymore. She had already fallen. She had already given her heart. The only question was whether she would admit it or keep pretending she had a choice. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. James's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her close, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and kissed her like she was air, and he had been drowning. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town, with Sheriff Anderson and Doc Miller as witnesses. Clara wore a simple white dress that the pastor's wife had lent her, and James wore his best clothes, his shoulder still bandaged but healing. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Clara with such tenderness that she felt it all the way to her soul. After the wedding, they moved into a room at the boarding house together while James worked on buying the land and planning their house. It was cramped and far from private, but it was theirs. And Clara found that waking up next to James made even the smallest space feel like home. They spent their days working. James took odd jobs around town to earn money for building materials while Clara continued to sell her carvings. In the evenings, they sat together planning their house, sketching ideas on paper, imagining where the kitchen would go and how big the bedroom should be. "I want a workshop," Clara said one night as they lay in bed, the boarding house quiet around them. "A place where we can both carve, with good light and space for all our tools." "Then we will build one," James promised. "You will have the best workshop in Montana." By June, James had saved enough to buy the land. They went together to the land office and signed the papers. And when they walked out, they owned something real, something that no one could take away. That afternoon, they rode out to see their property standing on the small rise that overlooked the creek. "We will build the house here, Spar," James said, pointing to a flat area with a good view. "And the workshop there, where it will catch the morning light. We can plant a garden over there, and maybe in a few years we can add a barn for horses." Clara looked at the land, at the grass waving in the wind, and the water sparkling in the sun, and felt something settle inside her. Peace, maybe? Or just the simple knowledge that she had found where she belonged. "It is perfect," she said. They broke ground on the house the next week, with help from men James had worked with at the ranch and people from town who had come to respect both of them. Clara worked alongside the men, hauling boards and hammering nails, her hands blistered but her spirit soaring. James worked despite his still healing shoulder, insisting he was fine even when Clara could see him wince with pain. The house rose slowly from the Montana earth, taking shape board by board, nail by nail. It was small, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it was solidly built, made to last. They finished the main structure by the end of July and spent August working on the interior, plastering walls and installing a stove and building furniture from scratch. On a hot day in late August, they moved into their house. They had almost no possessions between them, but Clara carried her carving tools like treasure, and James brought his few books and the sculpture Clara had made of him at Christmas. They set up their workshop in the small building James had constructed beside the house, arranging their tools on shelves and setting up a workbench by the window. That night, they lay in their own bed, in their own house, on their own land, and Clara felt happiness so complete it was almost frightening. "Are you happy?" James asked, as if reading her thoughts. "I am terrified of how happy I am," Clara admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." James pulled her closer, his body warm and solid beside her. "Things will go wrong sometimes. That is life. But we will face them together, and that makes all the difference." Clara kissed him, letting the kiss deepen into something more, and they made love in their own bed with the stars visible through the window and the sound of the creek drifting through the open door. Afterwards, tangled together in the sheets, Clara finally let herself believe that this was real, that she had found something that would last. Fall came, painting the landscape in gold and red. James took a job working part-time for a neighboring rancher, bringing in steady money, while still having time to work on their own land. Clara's carving business flourished. Word had spread about her skill, and people came from neighboring towns to buy her work. She carved animals and faces, scenes from the wilderness, even commissioned pieces that people ordered special. James continued to carve as well, and they often worked side by side in their workshop, the silence comfortable and full of shared purpose. Sometimes they talked while they worked, discussing ideas or telling each other stories. Other times they simply existed together, two people creating beauty from raw materials. In October, Clara realized she had not bled in 2 months. She waited another week to be sure, then told James over breakfast one morning, "I think I am pregnant," she said, watching his face carefully. James's expression went from surprise to joy so quickly it made Clara laugh. "You're sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I think so." James came around the table and pulled Clara into his arms, holding her tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Clara, we are going to be parents." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time, tears of overwhelming emotion. "Are you happy about it?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. James pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. "You have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it." "You already are," Clara said, and she meant it with every part of her soul. They went to see Doc Miller the next week, and he confirmed what Clara already knew. The baby would come in early May, all being well. The doctor gave Clara instructions on what to eat and how to take care of herself, and James listened with such intense attention that the doctor finally laughed. "You're going to be one of those nervous fathers, are you not?" Doc Miller said. "Absolutely," James replied without shame. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from sickness in the early months, and as winter set in, the cold made everything harder. But James was patient and attentive, bringing her tea when she felt ill, rubbing her back when it ached, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but rest. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, building a cradle that James carved with intricate designs of animals and trees. Clara sewed tiny clothes from fabric she had bought in town, her hands shaping soft cotton into gowns and blankets. They argued good-naturedly about names, James favoring his mother's name if it was a girl, Clara preferring something simpler. "What about Grace?" Clara suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands on her growing belly. "Grace is beautiful," James said. "And if it is a boy?" "Thomas, after my father." James nodded. "Thomas or Grace. I like both." As Clara's belly grew, James became even more protective. He insisted she not work too hard, not lift heavy things, not spend too long on her feet. Clara found it both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from love, so she tried to be patient with his hovering. In March, a late snowstorm hit, trapping them in the house for 3 days. They spent the time carving by the fire, working on small pieces they could hold in their laps. James was working on a set of horses, each one different, each one capturing a moment of movement. Clara was carving a family, a mother and father and child, their hands joined. "That is us," James said, watching her work. "That is who we are going to be?" "That is who we already are," Clara replied. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting into rushing water in the creek, the earth softening and greening. Clara's pregnancy reached its final weeks, and she moved through the days feeling huge and uncomfortable, but also filled with anticipation. She was ready to meet this child, ready to hold the baby she and James had made together. On a warm morning in early May, Clara woke to pain. She lay still for a moment, trying to determine if it was real labor or just another false alarm. When the pain came again, stronger this time, she knew. "James," she said, touching his shoulder, "the baby is coming." James was out of bed instantly, pulling on his clothes, his face a mixture of excitement and terror. "I will get Doc Miller. Do not move. Just stay right there." Clara would have laughed if another pain had not gripped her. "I am not going anywhere." James rode into town faster than was probably safe, and returned with Doc Miller within the hour. By that time, Clara's pains were coming regularly, and she was grateful for the doctor's calm presence. James held her hand through the contractions, his face pale but determined. The labor lasted through the day and into the evening. Clara had never experienced pain like this, waves of it that crashed over her and left her gasping. But James never left her side, and Doc Miller guided her through each stage with practiced ease. Finally, as the sun set outside their window, Clara gave one last push, and a baby's cry filled the room. Doc Miller held up a small, red-faced infant, checking it over quickly before wrapping it in a blanket. "You have a son," the doctor said, placing the baby in Clara's arms. "A healthy, strong boy." Clara looked down at her son, at his tiny face and his dark hair, and felt love so fierce it stole her breath. James leaned over them both, his eyes bright with tears. "Hello, Thomas," James said softly, touching the baby's small hand. "Hello, son." They spent that night as a family, Clara propped up in bed with baby Thomas in her arms, James sitting beside them, all three of them learning this new configuration of love. Thomas nursed eagerly, his tiny fingers gripping Clara's finger with surprising strength. James could not stop touching them both. His hand on Clara's shoulder, his finger tracing the baby's cheek, as if he needed to confirm they were real. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are perfect. This is perfect." Clara leaned against her husband, their son between them, and felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. The weeks that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby, but he still needed constant care, and Clara found herself living in a fog of sleeplessness punctuated by moments of intense love. James helped as much as he could, walking Thomas when he was fussy, changing his clothes, bringing Clara food and water and whatever else she needed. When Thomas was 6 weeks old, Clara finally felt strong enough to return to her carving. She set up a basket in the workshop where the baby could sleep while she worked, and slowly, carefully, she began to create again. James worked beside her, and they fell back into their old rhythm, the sound of their knives and the baby's occasional coos filling the space. "I have been thinking," James said one afternoon as they worked, "we should teach Thomas to carve when he's old enough, pass on what we know." Clara smiled, looking at their sleeping son. "I would like that, a family tradition. Like your father taught you." "Like my father taught me," Clara agreed. "And maybe we will have more children to teach as well." James looked up, hope in his eyes. "You want more children?" "Eventually. Not right away, but yes. I want Thomas to have siblings. I want a house full of life and love and noise." "Then that is what we will have," James said, and Clara knew he meant it. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a bright, curious boy who followed his parents everywhere. When he was 4, Clara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace. 2 years after that, another son arrived, Samuel, completing their family. The house expanded as the family did. As James built an addition for the children, creating a space where they could sleep and play. The workshop remained the heart of their creative life, and as the children grew, they began to join their parents there, learning to hold a knife properly, to see the grain of the wood, to coax shapes from raw material. Thomas showed the most aptitude for carving, his hands steady and patient like his mother's. Grace was less interested in the craft, but had a gift for seeing what a piece needed, offering suggestions that often improved their parents' work. Samuel was still too young to do more than make simple cuts, but he loved the workshop, loved being near his family while they created. Clara's reputation as a carver had grown beyond Elkhorn Valley. People from all over Montana and even from neighboring territories sought her work. She had more commissions than she could handle, and the money they made allowed them to live comfortably, to add horses to their land, to save for the children's futures. James had built their small property into a thriving operation. He ran a few cattle, trained horses, and continued to carve, his pieces selling as well as Clara's. Together they had created not just a life, but a legacy, something that would last beyond them. On their 10th anniversary, James surprised Clara by taking her back into Elkhorn Valley to the spot where they had first met. The town had grown, and the area near the general store was busier now, but Clara could still remember sitting there with her carvings, hungry and alone and afraid. "I think about you sitting here," James said, holding her hand, "about how I almost walked past without stopping. What if I had? What if I'd been too shy or too busy or just too stupid to see what was right in front of me?" "But you did not walk past, Kaziki," Clara said. "You stopped. You asked me to teach you. You changed everything." "You changed everything," James corrected. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. Everything good in my life comes from you." Clara turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. 10 years had added lines around his eyes and some gray to his hair, but he was still the man who had asked her to teach him carving, still the man who had been patient with her fears and generous with his love. "Everything good in my life comes from us," she said. "From the choice we made to trust each other, to build together. I love you, James Thornton. I will love you until I die and beyond." James kissed her there on the street where they had met, and Clara felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt 10 years ago, that dangerous beginning of hope that had turned into everything. They walked through the town together, visiting old friends, checking in with Sheriff Anderson and Doc Miller, both older now but still sharp. They had dinner at the cafe where they'd shared pie all those years ago, and the owner, recognizing them, brought them pie on the house. "You two are a legend around here," the owner said with a smile. "The carver and the cowboy who fell in love. People tell your story like a fairy tale." After the owner left, James laughed. "A fairy tale? Is that what we are?" "No," Clara said. "We are better than a fairy tale. We are real. We fought for this, worked for it, chose it every single day. That is better than magic." They returned home as the sun set, riding side by side on their horses, the children waiting for them with James's sister, who had moved to Montana the previous year and lived in town. When they walked into their house, Thomas, Grace, and Samuel rushed to greet them, all talking at once about what they had done that day. Clara looked around at her family, at her husband and her children, and the home they had built together, and felt gratitude so deep it was like prayer. She had started with nothing but a knife and some skill, alone and afraid and just trying to survive. Now she had everything that mattered. That night, after the children were in bed, Clara and James sat in their workshop, not carving, but just being together in the space that had become sacred to them. The walls were lined with their creations, years of work capturing moments of beauty and life. "Do you ever miss those early days?" Clara asked, "when it was just the two of us?" James considered, then shook his head. "I treasure those days, but I do not miss them. I like who we have become. I like our life full of children and noise and purpose. Do you miss it?" "No," Clara said. "I was so afraid then, so convinced that happiness could not last. But it has lasted. We have lasted. That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, and Clara thought about the sculpture she wanted to make next. A large piece showing a family around a dinner table, capturing the ordinary magic of being together. She would start it tomorrow, she decided. She would carve her family as they were now, preserving this moment before the children grew and changed and became people she could not yet imagine. "What are you thinking about?" James asked. "The future," Clara said. "How Thomas will probably take over the carving business someday, how Grace might become a teacher or a businesswoman, how Samuel might surprise us all and become something we never expected, how we will grow old together and watch it all unfold. And carve through it all," James added. "And carve through it all," Clara agreed. The years continued their steady march. Thomas turned 18 and announced his intention to stay on the land, to learn everything his parents could teach him about carving and ranching. Grace, at 16, declared she wanted to go to Denver to study business, and though it broke Clara's heart a little, she supported her daughter's ambition. Samuel, at 14, was still figuring out who he wanted to be, trying his hand at everything and mastering nothing yet. Clara and James were in their early 40s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard work, but their spirits still strong. They had become pillars of the community, known not just for their carving, but for their generosity and their solid marriage. Young couples often came to them for advice, and Clara and James always said the same thing: trust takes time to build, but it is worth every moment of patience. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, James took Clara's hand. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "We should travel. Take a trip somewhere we have never been, California maybe, or down to New Mexico. We have worked so hard for so long, we deserve to see something beyond Montana." Clara considered the idea, feeling both excitement and trepidation. What about the children? The ranch? Thomas can handle the ranch. He is 18 now, practically a man. Grace is responsible enough to help him, Samuel too. And we would only be gone a month or two. It would be good for them to manage on their own, and good for us to remember what it is like to be just Clara and James, not just parents and workers. Clara smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think that sounds wonderful. Where should we go first?" "You choose," James said. "Anywhere you want to see, we will go there." Clara thought about the world beyond their little corner of Montana, about all the places she had only read about or seen in pictures. "California," she decided. "I want to see the ocean." They spent the next months planning their trip, saving money, preparing the children for their absence. Thomas rose to the challenge with determination, proving himself more than capable of running the operation. Grace created schedules and lists, organizing everyone's responsibilities with the precision that would serve her well in her future studies. Samuel, for once, stopped joking around and took his duties seriously, wanting to prove he could be counted on. In early spring of 1896, Clara and James set out on their journey west, taking the train from Montana through Idaho and into California. It was Clara's first time on a train, and she pressed her face to the window like a child watching the landscape change from mountains to valleys to desert. James laughed at her enthusiasm but understood it. He felt it too, this sense of adventure, of possibility. They were not young anymore, but they were not old either, and the world was still full of things to discover. When they finally reached San Francisco and caught their first glimpse of the Pacific Ocean, Clara cried. The water stretched endlessly blue under a clear sky, waves crashing against the shore with a sound like thunder. James put his arm around her, and they stood on the beach feeling small and significant all at once. "It is beautiful," Clara whispered. "I never imagined anything could be this beautiful." They spent 2 weeks in California, exploring the coast, visiting cities, eating food they had never tasted before. They stayed in hotels with soft beds and hot baths, luxuries they allowed themselves because they had earned them. They made love with the windows open, the sound of the ocean drifting in, feeling like they were discovering each other again after years of familiar intimacy. But as wonderful as the trip was, they were both ready to go home when the 2 weeks ended. They missed their children, their land, their workshop. They missed the particular quality of Montana light and the sound of the creek behind their house. When they returned, Thomas, Grace, and Samuel met them at the train station, all three talking excitedly about what had happened while they were gone. Thomas had successfully delivered a foal. Grace had sold 3 of Clara's carvings to a merchant from Helena. Samuel had repaired the barn roof all by himself. The family walked home together, and Clara felt her heart swell with love for these people, this life they had built. She and James had seen the ocean, had their adventure, but this was where they belonged, here with their children in the home they had made from nothing. Life settled back into its rhythm, but with the subtle shift that came from knowing the world was bigger than they had allowed themselves to remember. Thomas began courting a girl from town, the daughter of the blacksmith, and Clara could see marriage in their future. Grace prepared for her departure to Denver in the fall, excited and nervous in equal measure. Samuel finally found his passion in training horses, showing a natural gift that surprised everyone except James, who had always suspected his youngest son had hidden talents. Clara and James continued to carve, their hands as sure as ever, their love for the craft undiminished by decades of practice. They created pieces that people treasured, art that would outlast them, beauty pulled from raw wood by patience and skill and vision. One afternoon in late summer, as Clara worked on a large commission, a scene of wild horses running through a canyon, James came into the workshop with a strange expression on his face. "What is wrong?" Clara asked immediately, setting down her tools. "Nothing is wrong. Something is right. Very right." James handed her a letter. "This came today. It is from a gallery in Chicago. They want to display our work. They saw pieces we sold to that merchant from Helena, and they want more. They are calling us masters of frontier folk art." Clara read the letter twice, hardly believing it. A Chicago gallery. Recognition beyond anything they had imagined. "James, this is incredible." "They are offering us a lot of money, Clara, more than we have ever made from our carving, and they want to do a show, display dozens of our pieces together. They want to tell our story." Clara felt tears well up. Her father had taught her to carve in a barn in the middle of nowhere, never imagining his lessons would lead to this. She had sold her first carvings just to survive, sitting on a street corner with hunger gnawing at her belly. And now, a Chicago gallery wanted to show their work, wanted to present them as masters. "We have to do it," she said. "We have to say yes." They did say yes, and over the next year they created pieces specifically for the Chicago show, working together and separately, pushing themselves to make their best work. Thomas helped, as did Grace before she left for Denver. Even Samuel contributed, carving a wild Mustang that showed raw talent. The show opened in the spring of 1897, and Clara and James made the trip to Chicago for the opening. They had never been to a city that large, and it overwhelmed them at first, the noise and the crowds and the sheer density of humanity. But when they walked into the gallery and saw their work displayed on white walls with their names on plaques, they forgot their discomfort. People came in droves. The show was written about in newspapers. Critics praised their technical skill and emotional depth. Collectors bought pieces for prices that made Clara dizzy. They stayed in Chicago for 2 weeks, attending events at the gallery, meeting buyers, telling their story over and over to people who found it fascinating. But just like after their California trip, they were ready to come home. Fame was interesting, money was helpful, but home was everything. They returned to Montana with enough money to secure their family's future for generations. They helped Thomas buy his own land adjacent to theirs, helped Grace pay for her entire education in Denver, set up a fund for Samuel for whatever he would eventually need, and they continued to carve, not because they had to anymore, but because it was who they were. The craft had brought them together and carried them through decades of life. It would carry them to the end. Thomas married his blacksmith's daughter Margaret in the fall of 1898, and the following year they gave Clara and James their first grandchild, a boy named William. Clara held her grandson and felt the circle complete. 4 generations connected through blood and love, and the craft her father had taught her so long ago. Grace graduated from her school in Denver and opened her own business helping people manage their finances. She came home to visit often, bringing stories of the city and hugs for her parents. Samuel eventually opened a horse training operation that became known throughout Montana and beyond. He married later a quiet woman named Anna who loved horses as much as he did. Clara and James grew older, their hair going gray and then white, their hands developing arthritis that made carving harder but not impossible. They adapted their techniques, used cushioned grips on their knives, took more breaks, but they never stopped creating. On their 30th anniversary in 1914, Thomas organized a party at their house, inviting everyone from town and beyond. The house and yard filled with people who loved them, people whose lives they had touched over 3 decades. Their children were there with their spouses and children, friends they had made over the years. Even some of the men James had worked with at the old Double R Ranch, gray-haired now but still spry. Sheriff Anderson, ancient but still sharp, stood up to give a toast. "I have known James and Clara since they were young people finding their way. I watched them fall in love, watched them build something beautiful from nothing. They are proof that love and hard work can create a life worth living. To James and Clara," everyone raised their glasses, and Clara felt tears on her cheeks. She looked at James, who was looking back at her with the same love she had seen in his eyes 30 years ago when he first asked her to teach him carving. "I would do it all again," she whispered to him. "Every moment, every struggle, every joy, I would choose you every single time." "You are my greatest creation," James whispered back. "Not the carvings or the land or the family, though I love all those things, but the life we built together, the love we created between us. That is my masterpiece." They kissed while their family and friends cheered, and Clara felt young again, felt like that scared woman sitting on a street corner who said yes to a cowboy with kind eyes and hopeful questions. The years continued. William grew and was joined by more grandchildren, then great-grandchildren. Clara and James became the family's anchors, the ones everyone came to for wisdom and comfort. Their workshop remained active, though they worked more slowly now, taking hours to complete what would have once taken minutes. When Clara was 65 and James 67, they decided to make one final piece together, a large sculpture that would tell their story. They worked on it for a full year, carving a scene of a woman sitting with her carvings and a man approaching, the moment they met captured in wood. When it was finished, they donated it to the town of Elkhorn Valley, and it was installed in the square with a plaque that read, "Clara and James Thornton, whose love and craft enriched this community for 40 years. At the dedication ceremony, Clara stood with James's arm around her and looked at the sculpture, seeing not just wood, but their entire life together. Every carving they had made, every moment they had shared, it all came back to that first meeting, that first choice to trust, to teach, to open their hearts to possibility. "Do you think we did it right?" Clara asked James quietly. "Do you think we lived a good life?" James looked at their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, at the community that had gathered to honor them, at the sculpture that would stand long after they were gone. Then he looked at Clara, his wife, his partner, his love. "I think we lived the best life possible," he said. "I think we loved each other well and raised good children and created beautiful things. What more could anyone ask for?" Clara leaned into her husband, feeling his warmth, his strength, his enduring presence. They had been together for 40 years, and she loved him more now than she had at the beginning, loved him with the deep, abiding love that came from shared history and mutual respect and choosing each other every day. They spent their remaining years in peace, surrounded by family, creating when they felt moved to and resting when they needed to. Clara's arthritis eventually made carving impossible, but she could still appreciate beauty, still run her fingers over smooth wood, and remember how it felt to shape it. James carved for both of them in those final years, his hands steadier than hers despite his age. He made small pieces for each of their grandchildren, gifts they would treasure. He carved Clara's face one last time, capturing her as she was now, aged and beautiful, wise and beloved. When Clara was 73, she fell ill with pneumonia. Doc Miller's son, who had taken over his father's practice, did what he could, but they all knew this was the beginning of the end. Clara lay in the bed she had shared with James for decades, their children taking turns sitting with her, saying their goodbyes. But it was James she wanted most. James, who held her hand through the long nights, who told her stories of their life together, who promised her that everything would be all right. "I am not afraid," Clara whispered one night when they were alone. "I have had a beautiful life. I have loved and been loved. That is enough." "It will never be enough," James said, tears streaming down his face. "I will never have enough time with you." Clara squeezed his hand with what strength she had left. "Then we were lucky to have what we did. 43 years, James. That is more than most people get. We filled every day with love and purpose. No regrets." "No regrets," James agreed, though his voice broke on the words. Clara died peacefully 3 days later with James holding her hand and their children gathered around. Her last words were, "I love you all. Take care of each other. Keep creating." James buried his wife on their land, on the rise overlooking the creek where they had built their house so many years before. The funeral was attended by hundreds, people from all over Montana who had been touched by Clara's art or her kindness, or simply her example of how to live well. After Clara died, James stopped carving. He could not bear to sit in the workshop without her, could not hold a knife without remembering her hands moving with such skill and grace. Instead, he spent his days with his grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandmother. Making sure they knew how extraordinary she had been, Thomas worried about his father, seeing him fade without Clara. But James was not fading exactly. He was just waiting, existing in the space between what was and what would be. On a warm spring morning 2 years after Clara died, James walked out to her grave, as he did every day. He sat beside it and talked to her, telling her about William's new baby, about the piece Thomas had just finished, about how much he missed her. "I will see you soon," he said, as he always did. But this time, he felt the truth of it. James went to sleep that night and did not wake up. Doc Miller's son said it was his heart, just worn out from age and grief, but Thomas knew better. His father had died of missing his mother, of being ready to join her wherever she had gone. They buried James next to Clara, their graves side by side as their lives had been. On the shared headstone, Thomas had inscribed Clara and James Thornton. They carved beauty from wood and love from life, together always. The town of Elkhorn Valley remembered them for generations. Their work hung in homes and museums across the country. Their children and grandchildren carried on their legacy, some through carving, others through different crafts and professions, but all through the example Clara and James had set of living with purpose, loving with generosity, and creating with joy. And in the workshop that still stood beside the house Thomas now owned, their tools remained on the shelves, their workbench still scarred from decades of use. Sometimes when the light came through the window just right, you could almost see them there, side by side, their hands moving in perfect rhythm, creating something beautiful together one more time. Their story became legend in Montana. The carver and the cowboy who fell in love over wood shavings and patient lessons, who built an empire of art and family from nothing but skill and determination and love. Parents told their children about them, teachers used them as examples, and always the message was the same, that love, real love, is built through daily choices, through showing up for each other, through creating something together that neither could make alone. In the Chicago gallery that had first shown their work, a permanent exhibit was established in their honor. Collectors sought their pieces, and prices climbed to heights Clara and James never could have imagined. But the family kept the best pieces, the ones that told their story most clearly, passing them down through generations as treasures more valuable than money. William, their oldest grandson, became a master carver in his own right, training his own children in the craft. The tradition that Clara's father had started in a barn so long ago continued, evolving with each generation but maintaining its heart. The belief that human hands could take raw materials and create beauty, that patience and skill could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Decades after Clara and James died, a young couple visited their grave. Tourists who had come to Elkhorn Valley specifically to see where the famous carvers had lived. They stood looking at the headstone, at the dates that marked 2 long lives, at the words that captured an enduring love. "I want what they had," the young woman said to her companion, "that kind of partnership, that kind of love." "Then we will build it," the young man replied, taking her hand. "The same way they did, one day at a time, one choice at a time, creating something together." They walked away holding hands, and if you believed in such things, you might have felt something in the air over the graves, a warmth like approval, like Clara and James blessing this new couple's intention to build their own beautiful life. Because that was their true legacy, not the carvings that hung in museums or the money their work had earned. Their legacy was the example they set, the proof they provided that love could endure, that 2 people could create something greater together than either could alone. that a life built on trust and patience and daily devotion was the greatest work of art anyone could make. And so their story continued, passed down through time, inspiring new generations to take a chance on love, to teach and be taught, to create beauty from raw materials and lasting relationships from tentative beginnings. The cowboy and the carver who met on a dusty street in Montana and built a love that lasted lifetimes, a story that became myth but was rooted in simple truth, that the best things in life are created slowly, carefully, with skilled hands and open hearts, and that sometimes the most beautiful masterpiece you can make is a life shared with someone who sees you, really sees you, and loves you anyway. In the end, that was what Clara had found when she said yes to James's request all those years ago, not just a student or a source of income, but a partner, a love, a life. And that was what James had found when he stopped to watch a woman carving with such focus and skill that she seemed to be creating magic. Not just a teacher or a craft, but a purpose, a home, a future. They had been two people alone, struggling to survive in a hard world, but together they had become something more. A family, a legend, a love story that would outlast them both and inspire others long after the wood they had carved had crumbled to dust. Because some things, the most important things, could not be carved from wood. They had to be carved from time and attention, from patience and faith, from the daily work of showing up for each other and choosing love over fear. That was the lesson Clara and James Thornton left behind. That was their greatest creation. And that was why, more than a century after they died, people still told their story, still marveled at their work, still hoped to find what they had found. A love built to last, a partnership that enriched rather than diminished, a life that proved beauty and meaning could be found not in grand gestures, but in the small daily acts of creation and devotion. They had been ordinary people who did something extraordinary. They loved each other well. And in doing so, they left the world more beautiful than they found it.